Recording started on the computer. Hello and most welcome to 1791 of the Heidegger series. And yes, we are approaching the even 1800. I think that will occur already in the coming week. It would be very interesting indeed. Today we have a new text suggested by my colleague Kalle Lundahl, The Threat of Empire, Monstrous Hybridity in Revelation 13 this time, by Heather Macumber. Sounds like a Scottish name. Abstract. I think we can take this paragraph in one go without movement. You can just rise it a bit. Yeah, that's the ticket. The Apocalypse of John. Is filled with monsters who threaten both spatial and cultural boundaries. They are generally understood as ciphers for the Roman Empire and its rulers. Rather than seeking the ancient Near Eastern origins of the monstrous imagery, the intent of this paper is to use monster theory to better understand why John employs monsters throughout the apocalypse. I argue that the author's portrayal of the threat and punishment of hybrid monsters reveals his own insecurities and fears concerning his community's assimilation with Roman culture. John uses monsters specifically to target rival prophets in his communities that espouse a different vision of living under Roman rule. Monsters are found throughout the visions of John's apocalypse. And as Tina Pippin observes, it is a crowded narrative. John draws from a rich biblical tradition that portrays antagonistic kings and empires as chaos monsters, like Leviathan, Behemoth, and Rahab. These chaos traditions, alongside ancient Near Eastern and Greco-Roman myths, form the backbone of John's inspiration for his own monsters that he employs as warnings for his community concerning the danger of assimilation. John creates new monsters derived from older models for the purpose of vilifying his opponents and to police cultural and religious boundaries for his community. The monsters of John's apocalypse are not simply window dressing, but important tools he employs to convince his audience that his worldview of anti-imperial rhetoric is the correct approach. That would be a perfect spot to go all the way up. It is customary to speak of two monsters in Revelation 13, especially the beast rising from the sea and the beast from the earth. In addition, scholars often combine the dragon from Revelation 12 alongside these two subordinate creatures to form a type of unholy trinity. In contrast, I argue that there are in fact four monsters present in the narrative. The red dragon, the beast from the sea, the beast from the earth, and the image of the beast. The presence of four monsters should come as no surprise, since John's monsters are an expansion of Daniel's four beasts. Each of these monsters represents a boundary beyond which John argues faithful followers cannot cross, as it would entail collusion with an imperial system that is opposed to God. There's no room for compromise. And at the end of Revelation, John vividly describes the blessed who have the ability to enter the new city, but the dogs and sorcerers and fornicators and murderers and idolaters and everyone who loves and practices falsehood are all denied access. Leonard Thompson has argued that a boundary not only marks differences, it creates them. This is an important point that bears more thought in relation to John's construction of monsters in Revelation 12 to 13. These beasts, like most monsters, live at the edges or the boundaries of the world and can be read as indicators of a culture's fears and anxieties. See if I can't do this in one go. Yes, I think so. John's purpose in writing the Apocalypse is to convince his audience that accommodation to Roman imperial rule is not compatible with their allegiance to God and Christ. And thus one finds in Revelation 12 and 13 that these monsters move from periphery locations such as the abyss, the wilderness, and the sea to directly threaten and deceive the faithful. John's monsters operate on the cosmic scale in his visions, but they are meant to serve as a warning for his own community that such monstrous forces are at work among their leaders and teachers who advocate a more accommodating position in relation to Rome. By showing how these monsters representing the Roman imperial system blur boundaries. John is effectively strengthening or even creating the boundaries of what he considers normative and authentic faith over and against competing factions in the early church. We read this one in one go without movement. Please. establishing boundaries, Jezebel as a monster. In John's letters to the churches of Asia Minor, he outlines his concerns that the churches are becoming too assimilated to Roman culture and ideology. To both the assemblies at Pergamum and Thyatira, he writes against the practice of eating food sacrificed to idols and practicing fornication. Already, he identifies these practices as demonic by calling them the deep things of Satan. John singles out three rival leaders in his scathing critique. The Nicolaitans, Balaam, and Jezebel, operating in Thyatira. It is not possible to identify these figures with any certainty, and likely John uses polemical names like Balaam and Jezebel to reinforce that their views lie outside his conception of normative faith. Of the three leaders John names in Revelation, Jezebel receives the longest and harshest condemnation. For John, any accommodation with a Roman imperial cult is akin to idolatry. And he demarcates clearly among the assemblies those who are choosing the wrong side. John's visions cast both the Roman Empire as other and those that follow him as deviant, when in fact it is John of Patmos who represents a minority view. He calls upon his community to dissociate themselves from the Roman imperial cult and vilifies those who have maintained ties, especially economic ones. John's anti-imperial resistance depends on drawing strong boundaries between what he considers normative beliefs and those that are deviant. In post-colonial studies, this is called othering, a process of defining one's own positive cultural identity by setting up negative cultural identities against which to contrast one's own culture or tradition as superior. This paragraph we can take in one go. It's a nice one. This is an aggressive move to vilify or demonize people or activities considered anomalous to one's own culture. The use of the other is familiar in biblical studies, and especially with regard to apocalyptic texts. Lorenzo di Tommaso notes that apocalyptic otherness fits well with a dualism that pervades apocalypses. middle ground or compromise is non-existent in apocalypses. As there is only space for good or evil in the world. This absolute polarity resonates with a narrative of revelation that sets up multiple dualisms between the lamb and the dragon, the New Jerusalem and Rome, good and evil, etc. In the case of the apocalypse, the situation becomes complicated, as John is not only resisting empire, but more specifically, also those caught between the world of the colonized and the colonizer. In his work on post-colonialism, Homi Bhabha speaks of a mimic man who stands in the liminal space between the colonizer and colonized as an interpreter or translator. For Bhabha, this colonial mimicry is the desire for a reformed, recognizable other as a subject of a difference that is almost the same, but not quite. This reflects the ambivalent attitude of the colonizer who desires to replicate itself, but only to an extent. Thus, the result is an individual or community that is essentially a hybrid being, neither indigenous nor truly incorporated into the empire. Baba describes these liminal figures as partial presence that, according to him, are simultaneously both incomplete and virtual. In effect, they become other and potentially monstrous to both the colonizer and the colonized, as they threaten the boundaries of each group. When one considers John's apocalypse, the true target of his rhetorics is not Rome itself, but those liminal figures like Jezebel or the Nicolaitans that participate simultaneously in emerging Christian communities and Roman life. Earlier scholarship argued that the apocalypse was composed in a time of persecution under the reign of Domitian. However, it is more conceivable that the conflict apparent in John's letters is a matter among early Christian communities struggling to discern how to live under the Roman imperial system. John clearly sets himself up as a separatist who sees no compatibility with the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of Rome. Thus, in Revelation, one finds a scathing critique of the mimic woman represented by Jezebel and by extension her community that is not only threatening but also monstrous for John and his worldview. And worldview, I think it's a good place to put a stop to 1791. Raise myself. Well, indeed, there were many interesting quotes here. Let's see. In the page 108, there is a compelling description how the monsters in the narrative are having different locales. It's about 12 lines down, I'd gather. In contrast, I argue that there are, in fact, 4 monsters present in the narrative. The red dragon, the beast from the sea, the beast from the earth, and the image of the beast. So this is the locale where everything is taking place at the beginning. We now get a sort of space for the story to develop within. This is a very common literary term. And what happens then? We go to 109, if you please, Kalle. 4 lines down. And I would quote mid-sentence that there is a difference in placement. That these monsters move from periphery locations such as the abyss, the wilderness, and the sea to directly threaten and deceive the faithful. So here also is added a temporal aspect to it. You could call it even a sort of a movement within the timeline, and we end up with a different spatial circumstance. Go 4 or 5 lines down. By showing how these monsters representing the Roman imperial system blur boundaries, John is effectively strengthening or even creating the boundaries of what he considers normative and authentic faith over and against competing factions in the early church. So we have an imperial system, and I think this obviously leads also to the idea of the imperial system that still remains in the United States and to some parts in the UK, almost gone there. It's a system, the Christians have to live in that system, and there is a sort of osmosis between the regulative system, the Roman system, and the ones who are in want of keeping their own faith, lifestyle, culture. I think that could be quite accurately compared to the problem in the Western world, where we have for instance, the metric system and the classical physical conception. And this is actually what happens in John as well. The first sentence in the next paragraph. In John's letters to the churches of Asia Minor, he outlines his concerns that the churches are becoming too assimilated to Roman culture and ideology. Transfer to the modern age, we know that we have accepted the Newtonian essentialist move completely. It's also part of Christian faith today. The Big Bang has become an established part. And of course, with that comes also the classical laws. So what John is depicting, I think, is a very common tendency. It happened in Asia Minor at the time, and it is a sort of thing that, in a way, has escalated. John is very harsh. You go to 110, 4 lines down. For John, any accommodation with a Roman imperial cult is akin to idolatry, and he demarcates clearly among the assemblies those who are choosing the wrong side. And John's vision casts both the Roman Empire as other and those who follow him as deviant. It's mentioned, this is called othering as well. It becomes an other. And the last sentence there, a process of defining one's own positive cultural identity by setting up negative cultural identities against which to contrast one's own culture or tradition as superior. Continuing on the next page, 111 there. This is an aggressive move to vilify or demonize people or activities considered anomalous to one's own culture. And I think John's move here is establishing almost like a new ideology of polarities. We could assume that there was a sort of wholeness present before these polarizations. This oddly equals the discussion we had about Kripke, where he wants to demarcate truth as following certain rules. And instead of understanding the private language argument, it was more a language isolate. John could be doing something similar here. And if we go down to the next paragraph, we have the following. In his work on post-colonialism, Homi Bhabha speaks of a mimic man who stands in the liminal space between the colonizer and colonized as an interpreter or translator. So what that could indicate, this could be, if not being wholesome, become something that ignores the liminal space. We often mention the liminal space before coast of Norway. The border zone is fruitful, it's full of energy, whereas a sharp distinction, a too sharp cut between concept and reality, between inner and outer, as we discussed before, is not as healthy and establishing. In the liminal, in the hidden space of the in-betweenness between aletheia and theia, is where all is happening. And this could be a modern suggestion not to attack the metric system, not accept it, but living together with it. And there can also be a hint that the monsters will appear. I like that. Very picturesque talk. The monsters are approaching. Maybe the approaching monsters are the too sharp demarcation line that sort of seduces us to separate us from ourselves and our environment, our doings, our bodies, and our liveliness. John is showing with the monsters, making too sharp distinctions could lead to this abyss here within us, because it is not at a far distance anymore. It is just in our midst. Kalle Lundahl, please come in here.
Thank you. Let me go to Angel here in the beginning. Yeah, so in my view, the strength in this paper by Heidegger Macumber is, at least for the first part, is that I argue that there are, in fact, 4 monsters present in the narrative: the red dragon, the beast from the sea, the beast from the earth, and the image of the beast. The presence of 4 monsters should come as no surprise, since John's monsters are an expansion of Daniel's 4 beasts, Daniel 7. So this is he that is going against most scholars here. She is emphasizing correctly, in my view, that there are in fact 4 beasts. So that is a good observation by Heidegger. And now I go to something else here. Page 4. So John's visions cast both the Roman Empire as alter. Let's leave it there.
Yes.
And Let me take up. This is, we have discussed this many times in the past, but let us not presume that all our listeners know this. Essentialism is the view that objects have a set of attributes that are necessary to their identity. In early Western thought, Plato's idealism held that all things have such an essence, an idea of form. So things are fixed. So this is the essentialism, and we both, you and I, we are not friends of essentialism, and that was not either Wittgenstein's view and many of the developers like Derrida. And there is a weapon against essentialism, that is clan bottle.
Very good, Callum. Yeah.
Many saints, Catholic saints, have rosary as their weapon, but the weapon against essentialism and many malady, the sickness of modern thought is essentialism. And clan bottle is an effective weapon, most effective weapon against essentialism. And here you see an clan bottle. So you see that we could say that this part becomes the inside. So the outside becomes the inside. So there is no distinction between the outside and inside in a clan bottle. Do you agree, Hans, that clan bottle is a good weapon against essentialism?
Yes, indeed. It's very interesting.
And why I'm now taking up this here? So Rome is not never ever mentioned in the book of Revelation explicitly. It's only implied. What we have there is Babylon the Great. It's assumed that Babylon the Great stands for Rome, but it could also stand, say, for Jerusalem. Jerusalem had many sins. It had killed the prophets, had killed Jesus, and so forth. So I would say that the inside enemy, so Babylon the Great, represents both Rome, the outside enemy, and Jerusalem, the inside enemy.
Yes, that's very good.
So they go into each other, the outside and inside enemy. So when you see you cannot say so Rome is outside enemy. So you could say perhaps it's difficult even here to say what is inside. Okay, this is clearly inside, but then the inside goes to the outside. So where do you draw the boundary? So let's assume that I would say that John killed two birds with one stone. Excuse me. He attacked both Jerusalem, the old Jewish religion, and Rome.
Yes.
And therefore, here, the last thing, I'm not aiming, so to say, Macumber, because every scholar does this mistake, because it's part of we are all grown up with essentialism. We are all grown up with Platonism, so it's so easy to fall into this trap. So therefore, clan bottle must become our second nature. We have to use clan bottle.
Just let me infer that the Klein bottle also show. I was mentioning space in the beginning, that there is an establishment of space, but the Klein bottle also show the true nature of space. And
absolutely.
Too sharply attack at the surroundings will actually lead to acceptance. So the two sharp lines in rhetorics or in ideology would lead to its opposite. For if you want to preserve your integrity, oddly enough, you need to take in what is outside. And this is clearly shown in the Klein bottle. It's one of those paradoxical features of it, so to speak.
And Klein bottle is smart because it shows, let's say, two birds the outside bird and the inside bird. So with clam bottle,
Yeah,
you have two
yeah,
birds with one stone. Or you have two birds inside one bottle, to be
yeah.
more correct.
Definitely, very good, very good.
And let me solve this another here. This was, as you remember, we ended here before you. And check out this phrase. This is very, if you're not careful, it's easy to fall into a trap. John clearly sets himself up as a separatist who sees no compatibility with the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of Rome. Rome, is it mentioned in Book of Revelation? Because you have actually quotation marks here. Okay, interesting. Rome is actually mentioned in Book of Revelation. But then, if you check, no, this is actually, Rome is not mentioned in the Book of Revelation. So it's the quotation mark should not be there because it gives you a false impression that Rome is actually mentioned there. If you get my point.
Yes, yes, yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, indeed.
So you could even say more correctly, there is no compatibility with the kingdom of heaven. Okay, that's fine, and the kingdom of Rome and Jerusalem. That is the old. That is the inside enemy.
Wow, yeah, I think it's very good, fantastic. Why, thank you very much for that, Kalle. What you say, should we put an end here?
Yes, let's stop there.
I say thank you very much to Kalle Lundahl for participating and for your nice comments as always. And thank you everyone for listening in. Have a very good morning, day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you might be. Bye-bye.